the worst things ever is a disappointing sequel. You love the first film, you're so excited for the next one, and then they completely drop the ball. Here are my top 10 most disappointing sequels. Number 10, Mortal Kombat Annihilation. The first Mortal Kombat is unapologetically 90s cheese, and I love it for that. But this one looks like a fan film. Now, if it were a Mortal Kombat fan film with a bunch of cosplayers who made this as a passion project, it wouldn't be that bad. But because this is a $30 million movie with a big Hollywood studio behind it, it's inexcusably awful. Everything from the horribly cheap effects to the atrocious line ratings, this movie is a fatality. Number 9, Incredibles 2. Now, if this movie were called Elastigirl, I wouldn't be as harsh on it, but because this is a direct sequel and not a spin-off, I don't think this movie is all that great. It took 15 years for them to come up with a generic plot where all of the character development of the first film is thrown out the window, and instead of continuing what made the first film great, the superhero family fighting together, they instead give that a backseat just to make Elastigirl the main character, with a thin, uninteresting plot with what is essentially a longer Jack short thrown in to pad the runtime. It doesn't have any of the smart commentary or wit of the first one, and feels more like one of those direct-to-video sequels Disney was constantly putting out in the 90s and early 2000s. Number 8, Ralph Breaks the Internet. Another Disney sequel that has nothing smart to say or any reason to exist. A boring plot, giving Vanellope an incredibly annoying song, and it's basically an 80-minute commercial for various memes and Disney products. There was no heart or passion put into this. It's the literal definition of the word cash grab. Number 7, Wonder Woman 1984. I had a really good time with the first Wonder Woman film, and this film felt so short of its potential. It's got some fun ideas, like a magic rock that can grant wishes, but as a price takes something away, like the story of the monkey's paw, but the way they use it has very inconsistent rules. It's made very clear that in order for the wishing stone to work, the person granting the wish has to be physically touching the other person, but in the big third act showdown, the villain decides to go on TV so he can grant wishes of people around the world, even though he's not physically touching them. They also kind of ruined Wonder Woman's character by using her wish that Steve Trevor was back, which is perfectly understandable, but in order for him to come back, she basically possesses a guy for a week and knows she did this. They basically turn her into a villain. And speaking of villains, the motivations for Cheetah are just so darn stupid. On top of that, the plot is overly complicated, and very little of it makes sense. There's a scene where Steve Trevor finds these planes in a museum, and not only are these planes in this museum fully fueled up and ready to go, not only is the plane he chooses a top-secret government invisible jet that they keep in this museum, he's able to fly the plane despite having been gone for 60 years. The script makes very little sense, and most of the movie is just stupid. Number 6, G.I. Joe Retaliation. An incredibly frustrating sequel that wastes its potential and feels completely disconnected from the first movie. There are a few good things, like Cobra Commander's updated costume, which looks far better and closer to the classic cartoon design, and the idea of Cobra taking over the government with Zartan impersonating the president, manipulating world leaders into disarming their nukes, so Cobra can establish a one-world government. That's a genuinely smart plotline with high stakes, almost Captain America Winter Soldier level stuff, but instead of being the driving force of the story, it's tacked on to the very end of the movie, when it should have been the starting point to set everything up. The bigger issue is how the film treats everything that's set up in Rise of Cobra. It kills off Duke in the first act, removes Destro almost immediately after introducing him, and completely ignores characters from the first film like Scarlet, Ripcord, and Breaker, with zero explanation. Ripcord, Duke's best friend from the first film, is replaced by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's Roadblock, which makes the whole thing feel less like a G.I. Joe movie and more like a generic Dwayne Johnson action flick. Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow's rivalry, which is one of the strongest emotional storylines in the first movie, is completely undermined when it's revealed that Zartan, not Storm Shadow, killed their master, erasing the personal stakes and ruining one of the best dynamics in the franchise. Lady J, one of the coolest characters from the comics and cartoons, is also completely mishandled. Instead of showing her skills as a master of disguise and infiltration expert, the movie reduces her entire backstory to, "My dad was sexist, so I joined the army to prove him wrong," taking away everything that made her interesting. Bruce Willis randomly shows up later in the film and adds nothing to the plot, clearly included just for marketing purposes rather than the story. Overall, the movie constantly sidelines character development and narrative continuity in favor of generic action and forced star power, trying to reboot the franchise mid-sequel instead of naturally continuing what came before. By the end, you're left with a few cool visuals and a handful of fun action beats, buried beneath sloppy storytelling, wasted potential, and baffling creative decisions, making this some a hollow, disappointing follow-up that fails to deliver on what the franchise was setting up. Number Number 5, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I was debating which one to put here, Crystal Skull or Dial of Destiny, for which one disappointed me more, and I decided Crystal Skull because I went into Dial of Destiny with fairly low expectations, whereas with Crystal Skull, I had just finished watching the Indiana Jones trilogy for the first time right before it came out, so I was a lot more excited for it, and it's completely awful. The story is stupid. Indiana Jones survives a nuclear explosion by hiding in a fridge, Shia LaBeouf brings the whole movie down, and overall, it's just very clunky. Number 4, Shrek the Third. The first 2 Shrek movies are some of DreamWorks' best, and for some reason they decided to be completely lazy with this third one. I don't know what happened between the first 2 Shrek films and this one, but somewhere along the way, something went terribly, terribly wrong. This movie completely lacks the energy, wit, and heart that made the first 2 films so special. None of the jokes land, the pacing feels off, and the plot is surprisingly thin and uninspired. There is a potentially fun idea with Prince Charming teaming up with other fairy tale villains to take over the kingdom, but even that feels underdeveloped and wasted. On top of that, the movie recycles the exact same core message from the first film about accepting who you are, except this time it's delivered in a much more heavy-handed, less clever way, leaving the film feeling like a hollow shell of what the franchise once was. Number 3, The Ring 2. The biggest issue with this is that all the psychological horror elements and compelling storytelling that made the first film so effective are completely gone. The original had an unsettling atmosphere, a sense of mystery, and a constant underlying tension, but the sequel loses all of that. I also don't think it was necessary to bring back Rachel and Aiden. The film actually opens with a new set of characters and a clever setup involving a guy showing the curse tape to his date, and that's where the movie should have focused. It would have been more interesting to follow a completely new cast, dealing with a different version of the tape, leading into the idea of an urban legend spreading and showing how it affects different people. Instead, we just circle back to the same characters from the first film, which makes the story feel redundant. While the concept of Aiden being slowly possessed by Samara does introduce some fun, creepy possibilities, the execution falls flat. The pacing is noticeably slower, the stakes feel lower, and the sense of urgency that drove the original just isn't there. As a result, The Ring 2 ends up being a weaker, less frightening, and far less engaging sequel. Our runner-up is Disenchanted. Disenchanted really lives up to its title. It takes everything magical, fresh, and fun from Enchanted and strips it away, leaving behind a safe, uninspired sequel that fails to recapture the charm of the original. The first movie had energy, clever storytelling, and a unique premise, but this one feels like a watered-down mashup of cliches. To be fair, the songs are decent, and the cast clearly enjoys revisiting their roles, delivering solid performances, but the story itself is nowhere near as creative or witty as the original. In fact, the plot feels strangely similar to WandaVision. Giselle uses magic to create a perfect fairy tale town where everything goes her way, but naturally things spiral out of control. There's even another magically powerful character played by Maya Rudolph who serves as the main antagonist, leading to a big magical showdown by the end. While Giselle stays good, the film toys with the idea of her turning evil due to a stepmother curse, which causes her to briefly shift between good and evil as the clock ticks toward midnight. One of the few fun concepts in the movie. Unfortunately, beyond Giselle and her chipmunk sidekick, most returning characters are sidelined. Patrick Dempsey is given a pointless night subplot that feels like filler, Idina Menzel and James Marsden barely appear until the third act, and Maya Rudolph's villain pales in comparison with the first film's antagonist. The entire movie plays it incredibly safe, leaning on nostalgia rather than doing anything bold or clever, and at times it feels more like one of Disney's old direct-to-video sequels rather than a proper follow-up. While it's watchable and has a few enjoyable moments, Disenchanted lacks the heart, originality, and magic that made the original so special. And my number 1 most disappointing sequel is Spider-Man 3. This is the first time I remember leaving the theater disappointed, not just by a sequel, but by any movie in general. After Spider-Man 2 had such a strong story and ending, with Harry finding out Peter's Spider-Man and deciding to claim his father's legacy as the Green Goblin, I was super excited to see how this played out. And what I got was an overstuffed mess with too many characters and plot lines, one of which retcons Uncle Ben's killer for no reason, a tacked-on Venom battle in the third act with a Venom that is completely miscast, and that cringy dance sequence. Just when we thought comic book movies could be a respected medium, with films like the first 2 Spider-Man and X-Men films, as well as Batman Begins, this movie comes along and sets them back, until Iron Man came out a year later and made them cool again. It's a lazy, unfocused, terribly written sequel. It's the most I've ever been disappointed by a sequel, and it unfortunately comes in at number 1. Share your most disappointing sequels, and I'll see you next time.